Welcome, everybody, to the Crash and Church Show. Today, we are going to talk about something that's kind of been on our minds. We talked about it a lot over the many episodes that we've been doing, but we've only been doing it as part of the topics that we've done in the past. And this one, though, I think it's just becoming more and more clear for a lot of people, but it's becoming more and more clear in every aspect of our lives, and that is the moral decline, the rapid moral decline of society, and how badly it is getting. There seems to have been a progression of the declining morality of society for a very long time, and of course, periods of history have peaks and valleys when it comes to the morality of the people. But this time, these last few years, and it almost seems like I wouldn't even say the last decade, it's been less than that, that we have now, it's almost like we've just jumped off of a cliff and we're just falling straight down now.
Yeah, and
I don't think we're rolling down a hill. I think we're just falling straight down.
I think, a big part of that stems from the fact that morality as a concept has been denied, so that there's a rejection that morality even exists in society that's been embraced at large. Or another way that they look at it is, relative morality, that what makes something moral is. I remember when I was first in college, I took a ethics and something, I can't remember the exact name of it, but an ethics course, right? It was basic, general ed class that you had to take. And the professor posed that question: what is morality? And it's the first time that I remember coming across the concept where so many people in the class, their answer to that was, what I think is right. That's what defines morality, is what I think is good and bad makes it good and bad. And it was just like this shock to me. This is the first time that I'd ever come across that sort of thinking in my life, that people could think that way, that people could think that morality wasn't a constant, and what you thought was moral or moral or not didn't define that, didn't change whether something was moral or not. And then, of course, the professor led into the various different philosophies and philosophers about what defines morality, all of which were interesting and have some merit. And I tend towards utilitarianism a little bit, but ultimately, I think you and I both agree on that morality stems from God, and that morality is defined by the Creator. And I think that there's a lot of merit in holding a view of that, of what makes something moral. And I think that you can't really get away from it without actually destroying morality. Because otherwise, at some level or another, you're putting morality into the hands of creatures, people, beings, who are flawed, who are imperfect and weak and flawed and think, are naturally inclined towards evil things. Humankind is also naturally inclined towards good things. But there's no question that humankind has a natural inclination towards evil and doing evil things. And so if morality stems ultimately from the wisdom of mankind, it's going to falter and fall. It's going to fail. And that's what we're seeing. People are casting off God as the source of what is good and bad. And that's not to say specifically, you and I are both, we belong to the same religious organization. We're both Latter-day Saints. And so we believe the Latter-day Saint tradition is the true tradition and teaches the correct version of doctrine and is, has the true revelation from God and stuff. But we also recognize that the history of morality in the United States comes from the Christian and Judeo tradition, of which the Latter-day Saint, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is a part of. And the United States was developed on those principles, on the Judeo-Christian principles of morality. And so as we see that being cast aside, then the country starts descending into this philosophy of relative morality, which equates to no morality.
Yeah, I would say that the along the lines of what you talked about, there is a rapid decline in our society and church attendance, especially among young people. So the COVID pandemic, of course, did something that never should have happened. There are a lot of things that never should have happened, but it did something that definitely never should have happened, and that was the refusal of churches to meet. In Canada, they still have things like this happening. They had the pastors being arrested. You had pastors and church members of whatever congregations, denominations, who were meeting in a parking lot in Idaho, and they were staying in their cars. They were just listening with their windows rolled down, and they were told that they could not do that. So some of those were arrested. But you started seeing this really rapid decline, especially in the last few years. And it really does come from the attendance of church and the increase in social media
I think that
viewing
plays
and
into it for sure, yeah.
participation.
And I would say, that the legal, the government denying people their rights to worship and stuff is, and I wouldn't say this definitively, but I would think that tends to be more a result than a cause. Because what you would see is, if the people were truly, truly righteous still, if the country was truly righteous, they just wouldn't accept that in a country that still ultimately is a government of the people. Despite the fact that freedoms are being shut down and corroded little by little, ultimately, if the people really wanted righteousness and wanted the righteous government, they'd vote in righteous people and religious liberties would stay.
I think you're misunderstanding what
Maybe.
I'm saying. I'm not saying that is the cause of it. What I'm saying is that it exacerbated the issue. It exacerbated the issue of church attendance among young people in particular. So it's easy to get distracted with worldly things. We're distracted all the time. Every single day, we are distracted by worldly things because we live in a worldly world. We have entertainment at our fingertips now. We have social media, as we just said. We have the internet. We have YouTube. We have all of these things that we have such rapid availability of, and we have a constant desire for instant gratification,
entertainment. I was thinking about
instant
that.
satisfaction. Yeah, we really do. But now it's to the point where you and I have talked about this a lot, and that is the almost complete annihilation of morality in the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
So you now have to have companies like Angel Studios, like the Daily Wire, the Blaze. They have to generate their own content in order to maintain some sort of moral connection. Yeah, absolutely. And Angel Studios does a really, really good job at this. But it's really amazing to me that they are completely privately funded. So the viewers are the ones who fund them. They donate. And it's interesting that while Hollywood has had really bad attendance at movies, particularly films that they really try to pass off, the complete opposite direction that they are going, the very apparent opposite direction that they are going, is really causing people to not want to go see them. So people, I do believe, do want to have quality shows, right, but you still have that sneaky, you still have those little bits that are thrown in there. And like you said before, morality is whatever makes me, or whatever I think is right. And what even among religions, and particularly Christian religions, even what one Christian denomination believes is right might differ from another Christian denomination. I shouldn't say might. I said it does differ among other ones.
And you could be forgiving of that to an extent. Obviously, it is one of my criticisms of like the Daily. I'll use the Daily Wire. I know the Daily Wire has been hot in the news lately, but it's just relative to the topic of entertainment. So, but though we might talk about the other controversy later on. But no, the Daily Wire's attempt to create entertainment that is, good, wholesome entertainment to fight the evil in the world. But their values, in my opinion, they're good values, but they have some weaknesses in that regard. So the Daily Wire is putting out content that is not as wholesome as I wish it was. And I think it's one of those things where, and I've heard the commentators say things like this before, where it's like people like violence and sex and swearing, so we're going to put that, some of that stuff in our shows because we want to sell our shows. And I just can't help but think to myself that that's kind of the wrong approach to saying these shows have become too evil, so we're going to make things that are less evil but still a little bit evil, so people still like them. That's kind of what it almost feels like they're saying when they say those sorts of things. And I'm not saying that the Daily Wire is going to produce, Game of Thrones type content, but they might, right? Because I know they watch those sorts of shows and they love them
eventually,
and they don't have a moral standard where they think that sort of thing in and of itself, putting nudity and excessive violence and gore on the screen is in and of itself an immoral thing to do and a problem. And so even in place now, Angel Studios is a different issue. I think they're a solidly Christian, obvious organization, and they're not going to be doing that sort of thing. And obviously there is a balance there where there is some level of that stuff where, to tell a good tale, you have to have some level of grit to it and some level otherwise it becomes cheesy and silly and unrealistic.
Well, there seems to be a common idea that, or assumption that, if it is by some studio that is not really that recognizable, like Angel Studios, that the production value is not going to be that high. Yet when you look at the show The Chosen, the production value is quite good.
They've done a good job so far.
The sets, the wardrobe, the cinematography, the quality of the sound, and
mostly the writing and the
picture. Of course, the writing and the acting really is superb. Yeah. It is really, really good. And you never really generally saw that kind of thing with shows that had that moral center, that really strong moral presence, and yet these do, and they've really set a good high standard. But you're starting to see that more and more. Typically, independent films are not, especially those that are not produced with Hollywood money. They do have low production value, and they're just not that great. But nowadays we are seeing that the production values are getting quite good.
And it's easier to do high quality production, especially if you're not doing heavy special effects. The cost of good filmography, or cinematography, whatever you call it, has gone way down, where anybody can do that nowadays. Like, anybody could produce really high quality video. Even the video quality of like the videos that we're doing for this podcast, it's not great. We're just using webcams. But if we were interested in, mostly the reason we use webcams is because it's easy, like it's simple. But I have a digital camera that does really, really high quality video that I could use for this, and I could do really, really high quality video. I could pay a little bit more attention to my lighting, and I could get a professional result out of my videos here with, a little bit of study, a little bit of effort, and a little bit of cost, compared to 20 years ago, where there was a major cost prohibition to doing that sort of thing, to being able to create that sort of thing. And so now, and that's not to say that I think Angel Studios probably has invested in, has purchased, actual, like the RED cameras, that are professional cameras and stuff. So they probably have invested more than that. But you wouldn't have to necessarily, even to create really high quality video.
But but this goes back to the fact that it's the contributions of the viewers that are funding those things, and it shows. It does show, it's a testament to the fact that people want to have quality programming and stuff that's not filled with all that other stuff,
and don't need special effects. I'd throw on top of that, because one of the other things Hollywood's gone to is you don't have this huge special effects laden,
You gotta have a $200 million
Otherwise,
budget,
people aren't going
or
to
else
watch it.
we're not gonna.
And
Then I had to go watch it, which is a bunch of BS.
and I think, yeah, it's a great point. Great point.
My son and I, we go to we go to Amazon Prime. You know, we'll watch Prime Video. We'll put it on Netflix and things like that. And I'll be searching for whatever's new and what are the hottest things. You see the traders and
yeah.
Yeah, so we look for things that we know that we would enjoy. So we know that right now that we are into colonial pirate history.
Mm-hmm.
We're into European history. My son's into Viking history. So we have shows that we can access. But when you look at the descriptions of the ratings and what is in what type of content is in it, almost 100% of the time it is strong language,
it's TVMA,
strong sexual content, and it's TVMA, and rarely are we finding anything that is PG-13 or TV-14, which is the PG-13 equivalent.
Like,
it's still filled with a lot of stuff. So now
language.
One of the shows that we love to watch is Stranger Things.
Mm-hmm.
And while it does not have the really harsh language,
really explicit, but it has a lot of language.
No, it does have a lot of language, but it's tame compared to everything else that's coming out today. Look, you just turn on Yellowstone on Paramount Network, and this is cable television. And it is laced with absolutely the worst language. You have the same thing on Netflix with 95% or more of the shows. Same thing with Amazon, 95 or more percent of the shows. And it's like Hollywood and all of these programs or all of these networks do not understand that people are clamoring for more high quality content. And when they do come out with high quality content that is not laced with those things, it's really highly rated. The audience loves it, but they don't create more.
You mean
and so this is why
Things. Yeah.
Like Stranger Things. Yep, exactly. And I do think that this shows that the moral decline is being not only contributed by, but led by the entertainment industry.
Agree. Though I would say
we have.
They try to make more. They just Hollywood is, and it's not all just Hollywood, but the entertainment industry obviously has been historically terrible at that. They have a success, something like, and Star Wars is the primary example of this, right? Where you have Star Wars come out and it's this huge hit. And so Hollywood translates that as what sells? Space things, robots. And so what you have is a million things come out after Star Wars. We were talking about Battlestar Galactica just the other day and how Battlestar Galactica was just a Star Wars ripoff ultimately. And I remember like the original Clash of the Titans and stuff. They had this little mechanical owl that was in the original Clash of the Titans because they needed to have their R2-D2 in there because that was this is what people want. This is what sells. And so instead of ever translating it to be, this is a great story, acted well, I don't know, the acting was all phenomenal in Star Wars, but acted well enough. But told well, exciting, thrilling, done well, well put together show and stuff. This is what people want. Instead of that, they're like, oh, people want space shows. And that's the way they translate it. You see the exact same thing with shows that they do now, and the hit thing right now, which you'd think they'd be past, but they're still not. But it's superheroes, right? Disney came out and did the Marvel thing, and all of a sudden, what sells? Superheroes. And so you just see tons and tons of superhero stuff, and
now it's being it's been bled dry, and they're now squeezing out the cartilage.
Well, and starting to do it where they're still thinking that we could sell superhero stuff because superhero stuff sells, but forgetting that what really sells is good, well-written, well-acted, well-produced stories done well. And so they're not doing that anymore. And so the superhero industry is dying accordingly. And they're saying, oh, it's superhero fatigue. It's not superhero fatigue. It's
they're saying that what they're saying is people are they're bigots because they're putting all of this woke stuff in there, and people aren't wanting to go see the woke stuff, and they're saying that it's because people are they're racists or
sexist,
they're
racist.
sexists or whatever, and that's not true. What they're seeing is a decline in the quality of entertainment, and it includes morality. So we have these moral things, and then you've got the same thing in our political structure, where now we have this massive, very outwardly immoral government, and it ranges anything anywhere from the state, the city, the county, all the way up to our national and federal government, and it's all over the world now, where we see very, very bad behavior by our elected officials, and these are our public servants. They're supposed to be held to a high standard. They're supposed to be accountable to the people, and it's almost like now we are the serfs. We elected them, but we elected them rulers. They call
And too
them
many people
we
seeing it
refer
that
to them
way.
now as our leaders, and they're not our leaders. They are our public servants, and so this outward refusal to be held to a moral standard. You look at Representative Swalwell, who had the Chinese spy that was sleeping with him for over a year, and he was totally, completely compromised. And yet he stood on the Foreign Intelligence Committee and all of these things. And yet, even though we have that, and people are crying for his resignation, nothing ever happens, and it's because it continues to be ignored, swept under the rug, refused to acknowledge it by whichever party is in power. And to me, that's really a decline. I was watching something yesterday. They were showing an interview clip of Donald Trump back in the 90s, and I think it could be easily said that Donald Trump is not a moral person. He's not a well-centered. He doesn't have good moral center. Just 1 minute. And in this interview, he was saying that if somebody wrongs him or wrongs a person, he feels like the person who was wronged now has the right to go completely out of their way to wrong that person back.
Yeah.
He said an eye for an eye. He absolutely believes an eye for an eye. He doesn't believe in turning the other cheek. Those were the words he used. And when you have someone like that, where now the right looks at Donald Trump, many people on the right look at Donald Trump as
the hero.
Hey, we're glad because he hits back. We're glad because the left has hit us for so long. We want somebody now to hit back, and it's okay if that is an immoral person. It's okay if he does dirty
fight
things
fire with
back.
fire type approach.
Yes, because we're so tired of having the dirty things done to us. And I looked in the comments of that video clip, and it said one person said turning the other cheek does nothing. And I really stopped engaging in social media quite a bit because people are never going to listen. But the thought went through my head is it might not do anything now. It might not do anything in this life, but that's not why you turn the other cheek. You don't turn the other cheek
It's
because
also extremely
you want
short-sighted. To say that it doesn't,
It's
to
very
say that it
short-sighted.
doesn't do anything is only looking at the situation itself. And that may be true. Like if you turn the other cheek, someone will wrong you, you turn the other cheek, they wrong you again. It doesn't actually solve the problem or make it go away or anything. So that's all they're looking at is the short one. But if you take society as a whole, and you take society as a whole being willing to en masse turn the other cheek when they're wronged, it absolutely does something. It makes a huge difference in what society is and what we become, to be able to forgive each other and to turn the other cheek and to look past grievances and grow up and be bigger people, be adults. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I think that was pretty apparent. But when George W. Bush left office, there was no fanfare. He left. He didn't ask anybody to follow him, and the Obamas went into the White House. All of the people took down stuff. They actually what's the word I'm looking for? Not graffiti, but
They graffitied the White House.
they graffitied. No, but they didn't treat it respectfully, and they did the same thing, of course, when Trump left. They tried to erase every single bit of him that went in there.
Yeah.
But yet, when you have George W. Bush, whom I disagree politically on many things, but you cannot absolutely, in my opinion, discount or discredit them for how they carried themselves. They generally carried themselves extremely respectfully. They were respectful of other people. And I remember when George W. Bush was asked about people opposing, what do you say about all of the people that say this about you and blah, blah, blah. And his response was, isn't it great that we live in a country where a person can say things like that and not be punished for it?
Yeah.
That was his response. So, and now what we are told and what is the socially acceptable thing is if you say something that another person doesn't like, especially if you are on the left and someone on the right says something you don't like, you now have the right to completely cancel that person. You have the right to get them to lose their job, to ruin their career completely to where they can't work again, to destroy them financially. All of these things that Donald Trump said, if that happened to you, you have the right to turn around and do it back. Yet, if you look at the way some of these people who have been canceled have not fought back, how they have turned the other cheek, people generally look at them as, hey, you know what? That person they still carried themselves respectfully.
So
they were dignified.
It's actually a really good tie-in to, I wanted to talk about it a little bit. I know it's not something highly interesting to you, but it's newsworthy with what's happening with the Daily Wire and Steven Crowder right now. And I think the reason why you're not interested in it, when we were talking about it a little bit earlier, is because you see it as a petty squabble. And I absolutely agree. When you have two conservative groups that are, in this flame war publicly and in the public space and stuff, one of the biggest things that I think people sort of respond to that is think, why isn't this being done behind closed doors? Why are you airing these things publicly? And just sort of the nasty commentary, it'd be really refreshing if one of them would have just responded by saying, oh, it's interesting they said that. Well, best of luck to them, and just let it go. Just turn the other cheek. Like in that sort of situation, being able to just turn the other cheek. And I understand why the Daily Wire responded the way they did and stuff. Steven Crowder attacked him in a way that they feel hurts their reputation, and so they feel the need to defend that, against him. And it's understandable. And yeah, it actually would have been more refreshing if the Daily Wire had just said, no, we don't agree, but that's okay. We're just going to move on, and not really bothered to respond more than that. And sometimes companies do that. You do see that every once in a while, and it always is really refreshing when a company is just bigger. I remember the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, going back to that, the musical came out that was the Book of Mormon musical. And I don't know if you're familiar with that at all. I'm a little bit familiar with it. I've never seen it because it's offensive to me, right?
It's a mockery.
Because it's a mockery, and I've seen bits of it online, through on YouTube and whatever and stuff, and it's just kind of like, yeah, it's just offensive. It's just crass and crude and very unkind to, and so the way that the church responded to that was they took out a full page ad in the playbill or whatever, the program for the Book of Mormon, and that said, now you've seen the play, how about checking out the real thing? Read the Book of Mormon. And that's the way the church responded to this situation. And it was just such a nice example.
It was a proactive response.
Yeah, and such a nice example of turn the other cheek. Instead of being defensive, instead of attacking, it just said, hey, this is here, now you've seen it. Why don't you check out the real thing
Well,
too?
it was
Really cool.
kind
It was
of
really cool.
it was kind of playing off the notoriety that was being created as kind of which was supposed to be a
Brilliant
diss,
marketing.
and
Yeah.
it turned it around and said, "Hey, now look at this." So what do they say that free marketing is always the best marketing, and that's kind of what
Yeah.
happened with
Well,
the Book of Mormon play,
especially when the church responds that
musical.
way. Just think if the church had responded by saying this is sick
How
their lawyers on
horrible,
them,
and
like
yeah,
say, the things you hear about, like what Scientology does, when people make
yeah.
Scientology documentaries, that the Scientology church goes after them and starts spying on them and harassing them and different things like that, is the rumor. I don't want to say anything that isn't, this is just hearsay, right? In other words, I don't have personal experience on it, but that sort of a response to something makes, if it's true, makes an organization like that look worse, not better. It sort of backs up the criticism. And when you have this mockery of an organization, that the organization responds the way the church did, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints did to the Book of Mormon musical, it shows that the church actually is good and righteous and trying to be, do as Christ would have them do. It means that they put their money where their mouths are, in other words. And so it's a really refreshing thing, and I'd love to see that more, particularly with conservatives, because conservatives in general are meant. I mean, the whole idea behind conservatism is standing on principles of morality, right? Judeo-Christian morality, and not all.
Yeah, but it's
Go ahead.
what's really sad is it used to, even a couple of years ago, we could have said that by and large, many members of the Republican caucus were, I considered them to be more, pretty upstanding. Now good grief, a handful maybe
To actually be moral,
that I can
upstanding
think of
people.
off the top of my hand that I would consider
Yeah, I'm talking
to
about
be
what conservatism
morally
should
upstanding.
be rather than what the conservative movement is. Yeah.
Well, but my point is though is that this is part of the decline that I'm
Sure.
talking about. This is the decline in our society. We have, this now constant bombardment of language, especially. Language to me is, there is zero need for harsh language in any situation at any time anywhere. I don't.
And by
I
harsh
feel
language,
that
do
way
you
completely.
mean foul language, or do you mean sharp?
Foul
Okay.
language, foul language, cursing,
Okay.
swearing. I truly do not believe that swearing is justified or needed or makes a point any more poignant than just using strong language without the profanity. So it has become now so common that among cable television news shows, or not news shows, but cable shows, the F word is now rampant.
Yeah. Particularly
Using
on
the Lord's
YouTube
name
and
in
stuff.
vain is
And
using
even
the
in
Lord's name in
mainstream
vain.
things, that's one of the things we were talking about the Gutfeld show a little bit, and you were saying how you didn't particularly like it, and I kind of agree with you.
Can't
And
stand
one of the
it.
reasons why I
Can't
don't like it
stand
is
it.
because of that sort of thing. Now they do bleep a lot of the harsher stuff out of it because it is, primetime show.
But why?
But why even say
why
it?
do they
Yeah,
think
why even use
it's
it?
because they think that culturally we are in a place where that kind of thing is fun. And I can tell you, like, I make fun of some people that I work with because they'll use the F word 40 times in one sentence, where literally every third or fourth word is the F
Right.
word. And I'll kind of joke with them, but I'm, I definitely have a point, and that is, do you have to use the F word like that? And they say, oh yeah, you're right. And then they'll do it again and whatever. And but they do it so often
It's
now
habit for
that
them,
it's habit, and they don't think about it. But yet, to someone like me who watches his language and who is trying to raise a child who doesn't rely on that kind of thing, it's pretty offensive, and not meaning that I can't get over
Sure.
it, but it just
Well, you
means
can even be
that,
forgiving of
hey,
it.
I don't need that. It brings me down, but it brings me
Sure.
down. It's like,
Yeah, no,
I don't want to
worked
be around
in
that
places
kind of.
like that too, so I know exactly what you're saying. And you can kind of be forgiving of it. I use, the what you might call G-rated curses or something. Like I use the heck and dang and shoot sort of. That's the way I talk, and so I do it natural all the time. I drop something, I say dang it, I say dang it, that's
Yep,
the way I
that's what I
respond and
say.
stuff, and that's because it's habit.
Yeah.
And there's an argument to be made where what's the difference between saying the F word or saying freak? I say, what is the get that freaking thing out of my face,
Did you see? So we talked about Battlestar Galactica earlier, and the new, the rebooted, that they totally got around that by using the word frack.
Which was
that was totally the F word. That's exactly what it was. It was meant to be the F word. It's just society doesn't know that as a curse word, and so
which was a really clever way to do it. And they did it in such a way that it actually, which that comes from the original, by the way. The original, the 1970s version of Battlestar Galactica is where that word comes from.
Not at that rate.
But not at that rate, exactly. They used that, and then they also used, and they didn't translate this one. They used Felgercarb or Felgergarb. I'm not sure if I think it's carb. Felgercarb was one of the other swear words that they had in the 1978 version. That one they didn't. That one didn't. They couldn't make it work, so they didn't translate that to the update. But frack did.
You remember that the old LDS missionary swear word was fetch.
Vaguely, yeah.
Fetch or flip.
Yeah,
it was either flip or fetch.
And there's an argument. There's a certain argument to make that if you took the societal view of the words out, that's saying, what the fetch versus saying what the F, there's no difference. Like either way, you're using a word that you don't need to use to express things in a way that you didn't need to express it, to use an expletive. And so there is something to that, but I think that that's also a little bit disingenuous to say that because there is societal perception of words, and the societal perception, even though it's become a lot more common, the societal perception of the F word and words like that is still that they're meant to be offensive.
It's supposed to hold that meaning. Yeah, it's supposed to hold that meaning.
They're supposed to be offensive. They're supposed to be foul. That's why people say them.
Yeah, we go back and we'll watch movies like Dolphin Tale, even Flipper, the one with he was Frodo. Elijah Wood, yeah. So Flipper with Elijah Wood. You should watch that with your kids. It's a lot of fun. It's very, very clean, and I really enjoy it because of that. The same thing with Dolphin Tale. Dolphin Tale is a very, very good movie. It's a very kid-friendly movie, and it's entertaining. It's well acted. It's got Harry Connick Jr., Ashley Judd. Mm-hmm. It's well done. It's got Chris Christopherson in it as well, Morgan Freeman. But these are really good shows, and Hollywood will do these again, and people will go see them, and they do fairly well. But they don't get the hint because they're not $300 million blockbusters. They're not $500 million blockbusters, and it's really unfortunate. You did have in this Top Gun sequel, you didn't have any sex.
An implication,
you had him
sort of
spending. You had an implication, but you didn't have
the actual
act. Not like in the first. In the first one, you shot. Yeah. They showed it. So, but there was cursing.
There was cursing, but there nowhere near like first one.
Nowhere near like what it is, even on the first one. Exactly.
It had one stronger. It had that one moment of the F word that was stronger than anything in the first one. But other than that, it was actually had less cursing too. It was what was it? It was
PG-13,
sure
right?
It was,
so, and when you see those movies that are like that and they do very, very well, even by today's standards, that would be considered a clean movie. And that's why I'm bringing it up. Is by today's standards, it's like that, but yet it did so well. And yet, isn't it interesting that Hollywood still does not look at that as the model of what they should shoot for? It was well acted, it was well written, it was friendly to most families, and yet we don't we don't get that. They'll
More
do
in the
that,
movies,
but then they'll do
more in the movies than you
they'll do
the
another
TV
9.
shows. You've seen a divergence in that regard a little bit
But
because
TV shows are horrible.
well, movies, because they do these big
Horrible.
blockbusters and they put so much money into them, that there's more of a need to get every bit of audience that you can, and making an R-rated movie automatically cuts part of your audience out. And there used to be a cultural thing back in like the 80s where it didn't, because they'd make these R-rated shows that weren't supposed to be for teenagers, but were secretly for teenagers because they knew teenagers went and saw them anyway.
They wanted to see those things, which is why movies like Revenge of the Nerds and all these other shows, they did that. They did those things because they wanted the teenagers to go see them, because they figured, but
teenagers that's fallen out of fashion, both amongst teenagers and amongst, and part of that's because of cable and stuff. Like, what do you need to sneak in to see an R-rated movie for when you can just turn on HBO? Like,
just turn on Netflix,
or just turn on Netflix.
No, you don't have to do that. Yeah, you just turn on the Prime Video.
You could even
it's right there.
None of that's even necessary. All you have to do is get on your computer and Google, the P word.
Yeah, whatever you want. Yeah.
PORN.
Exactly.
Right?
But I mean, it's
ubiquitous now, that sort of thing. So the idea of sneaking into R-rated movie is now. So let me finish my point really quickly, which is that in the movie scene, because they want to get as much audience as they can, including the kids, they shoot for the PG-13 for these big blockbusters. You see a lot less R-rated movies now than you used to, especially with these big blockbusters. They generally will make them PG-13. But then when it comes to cable, because the audience, once again, if the family just owns it, that's not the case anymore. And so cable and specifically streaming services have started just going down the path of including as much of that stuff, language, sex, nudity, violence, as possible. So there's
Isn't it interesting too that the vast majority of these streaming service movies, the movies that they produce, are rated R. The majority of them are rated R. And while you can definitely say that the majority of films that are shown in the theater are rated R, the percentage is higher on these streaming services, and so they'll really show these all these trailers and all that for them, and that's the way that they are, and it's horrible.
TVMA.
So I have also
I just want to throw out
noticed
really quickly that TVMA, the rating system there is problematic, because TVMA, if you don't use any F words, but you use other words that wouldn't be allowed on network TV, like the S word or things like that, you will get a TVMA rating. So TVMA rating goes all the way from stuff that has fairly strong language in it, but not F-bombs throughout, and no sex and not extreme violence, to those extremities. And that's all included in TVMA. It all gets kind of thrown into that same big bucket.
Yeah, and I have seen some of the shows where they don't have any of those other things, but because of the language, they'll get
an
that.
Example is one of
rating.
my favorite shows is Justified with Timothy Olyphant, and relatively speaking, it's not terrible. It's got enough in it that makes it TVMA and stuff, but it's not like Game of Thrones stuff, and it's not like F-bombs every other minute or anything like that. But it's it's got adult language, and it's got I think there's some semi-distant flashes of naked butts in certain parts of it, sort of thing. But it's not like Game of Thrones, explicit nudity sort of moments.
I think I even heard of it. Yeah. There was there's something else that really is contributing, and we have seen this really take the front stage, and that is the rainbow jihad. Right. In society, particularly the trans movement right now. This drag queen shows, the trans movement, this transgender stuff is so twisted. I was telling my son a couple of days ago that I firmly believe that the people who are fixated on this, the people who believe these things, believe that a man can be pregnant, I truly believe that they do suffer from a mental illness, that it is a form of a mental illness, because it takes them, their perception is complete fantasy. It's completely rooted in falsehoods, in lies. It's not based in any reality whatsoever. There's no science behind it. It is only on feeling. And it goes back to what you were talking about, how morality is what makes me feel good, or what I think is right. And so if a person says, and that goes down, it comes down to also people saying my truth.
Yep.
It's my truth. Whatever you believe is your truth, then that's good for you. And this acceptance that we have as well of other people, where we feel like we cannot offend anybody. So we have to say it's okay because it's your truth, and you want to do that.
There's a certain level where, yeah, I mean, obviously everybody's truth is their own as far as what they perceive, and you can't make me believe something that I'm not going to believe. It's exactly what you're saying, though. The issue becomes when you are trying to force me to respect what you believe, even if what you believe is nonsense, is garbage, in my opinion. I don't have the right to think that what you think is garbage. They're trying to force me to accept
but
that what you believe is your truth is just as valid as any other truth.
But it's really this idea that we are supposed to believe the lie. And we are supposed to believe based on your feeling. And they say things like we've evolved into this. Yeah. I truly believe that we are regressing as a society. Yeah, yes, I believe we are regressing as a society. We are becoming more violent. You just look at California, and you look at the cities in California, the homeless encampments, all of these areas that are absolutely third world type communities, and it's supposed to be what was the pinnacle of the American landscape was California. It's supposed to be the greatest state. It's supposed to be the most beautiful state. But what they have done to it is they've completely destroyed it, and it is this sick and very twisted version and very sick and twisted morality that has just completely gripped California to where now so many people that used to believe that things like that were bad, now they've come to accept them and say, you know what, as long as it doesn't affect me. Well, it is affecting you. It's affecting everybody now. The drag queen shows are affecting everybody. The trans movement is affecting everybody. All these things are affecting us because we gave an inch, and the inch that we gave was gay marriage.
Yeah, and they talk about, you hear that sort of feedback all the time where it's like, if it doesn't affect you, what do you care what other people do in the privacy of their own lives? And I've always rejected that thinking.
And here we are.
Always rejected it. It's like, it does affect you. We are a society. The society is a living organism of some sort. It's a creature.
We are social creatures.
When you allow infection into it, it infects it, and it does affect you. And there's a balance there,
That's
obviously.
Like saying that if I have cancer in my big toe, it's not in my leg, that it's not going to affect my leg. Well, my great-grandmother got cancer, and it started in her foot. She had the front half of her foot amputated. Then eventually she had the rest of her foot amputated at the ankle. Then she had her leg amputated above the knee, and eventually it killed her because the cancer spread. And that's what immorality is. It is a cancer that will spread.
Absolutely.
If you don't think it's going to affect you, it will affect you. And eventually it will.
And there's balances to be struck there, because I do think there's a problem with authoritarian sort of restriction of freedom. Like, we want to allow people to make the choice to make bad choices. Like that's part of freedom. Part of freedom is allowing people to make bad choices as well. And so just standing behind the principles of freedom.
But there are laws against things. You can't. We allow people to make choices, but you're not allowed to murder.
They've taken it too far. Exactly. And so that's what I mean by the fact that there's a balance there. I was also going to comment on the evolution thing. It's a tricky thing because in a lot of ways we have evolved. Society has evolved, and it did evolve. And these principles that founded America, America's gone through a lot of turmoil and a lot of growth because of that turmoil. And in a lot of ways, we have evolved as a country, and there's things that we've become
stronger. We have become stronger.
I just mean it as individuals. There are things that we couldn't even contemplate thinking certain ways that were common to think a couple hundred years ago that were evil. They were just despicable things that people just thought. Yeah, and racism is one example of that, where there's no question that we have evolved on the issue of race up to a certain point, right? And then what's happened is, I think I don't know if it was on the show they were talking about this or outside the show, but up to the 90s, about the 1990s, like race relationships were practically gone. Like the most popular,
almost to the mid 2000s.
Yeah. And it just like the most popular TV shows were by African American people, the music artists, all that sort of thing. Nobody thought of other people of other races. And, you still had pockets where there was racism that exists, obviously, and there were still incidences of racism. But as far as the societal view of race and the way that we interacted with each other, it was pretty much just kind of gone. And then, when we've talked about why before, you and I both believe it kind of is Obama's fault.
It started a little bit before that. It started with Al Gore. Al Gore started doing it because he was telling everybody that George W. Bush didn't want to count the people in among the black communities, but it was incited. It was the politicians who incited it. They created a calamity. They created the perception of a calamity in order to gain favor among the people. It's a communist tactic.
And so in that way, we have devolved, absolutely. But we can't discount the fact that we have also, even in the ways that we've devolved, we're still more advanced and more evolved in our thinking in that regard than we were.
We are more advanced,
200 years ago,
When I say we've also de-evolved, is we I don't believe we are smarter. I believe we're dumber.
Yeah, I agree. We're not smarter.
Our educational system, our educational institutions are not teaching us how to be smarter. They're teaching us how to be robots. They're teaching us what they want us to know so that they can control us. And so when you have that, you have a people who are not able to think for themselves. When you have a people who are not able to think for themselves, you have people who do not innovate. And that's why someone like Elon Musk comes along, and he's a very smart person, and he does these things that really impact society for good. And yet people like that they're not around like they used to be. But we have such great advancements. It took what was it? They put a rotary phone in a room with young people, like 20-something-year-olds, and they couldn't figure out how to use that phone. It took them 15 minutes to figure out how the phone actually worked. 15 minutes of working with the phone to try to figure out how the phone worked.
Knowing. You show, if you show them, they'd learn it like that. It's not like,
but they don't know how to use a phone book. They don't. So these are things that I'm talking about, though. They don't. If you gave them a book that was an encyclopedia with the topics alphabetized and whatnot, they would eventually get used to it. But what they're used to is doing a search. What they're used to is an instant gratification, and so they've lost a lot of things. We've come to realize that the citizenship test that is required of immigrants to become U.S. citizens cannot be passed by the majority of high school students in the country.
Yeah, and majority of citizens and stuff.
So we have de-evolved in many of those respects. And we have de-evolved in that morality. We've de-evolved in what civilization is supposed to be. We've become a world of whatever suits me, I have a right to do it. That's what we've now become. And even if that thing is looting, even if that thing is burning a building or taking down a statue because you disagree with it, if it suits me, it becomes morally right to do so. And that's where I think we have really lost connection with morality in our society, and how quickly it is just completely, it's free-falling. It's completely free-falling at this point.
I was looking up de-evolve versus devolve, because I think I said devolve earlier, and I think devolve is
it's de-evolve.
I think devolve. Well, I don't know if de-evolve is a word, but at least the meaning is correct. But the word that I use, devolve, is not correct. So that means something else. I wanted to talk just a little bit more about the Daily Wire thing, not in terms of them specifically, because it's just the latest example of this sort of thing and stuff. But I did want to talk about, as it relates to morality a little bit, the contractual situation that's involved in that, because I think. I think it's funny. I've been watching these videos. I know you said you haven't been really following it because you don't care about it and stuff, and understandably, but I have, because I happen to follow them both.
Yeah,
stuff.
I'm not a fan of Steven Crowder, and I'm not a fan of the
Right.
Daily Wire. That we've talked about this. I do really respect Matt Walsh. I
Right.
think he's just a really spot on guy.
But anyway, so I keep watching videos and going back and forth on whose opinion I think is right, because apparently I'm easily swayed in that regard. And I realize that's because when I listen to the person, I'm listening to them make their emotional plea, and I buy into their emotional plea. And I don't really know if people are being honest or not. So I need to stop judging and stop deciding whose side I'm on. But the one thought that I wanted to bring up that I thought was an interesting point about it was related to the idea of contracts. And it was, I've mentioned him on our show before, Shad from Shadiversity, which is actually, I think it was his other channel, the Night's Watch, where he said this. He commented on this, and he commented on the whole idea of the contract, and how the whole idea that the Daily Wire, and it's just coincidentally the Daily Wire, because it's all companies. It's not the Daily Wire. It's company practice. It's the way you do it when you get a job. It's the way that it happens with contracts, is that the person comes in with the contract and they lowball you as much as possible. And then if you are gullible or unknowledgeable or inexperienced, or just don't realize how much you're actually worth, and you sign on the dotted line, then you get lowballed. Then you get cheated because you didn't know any better. And he basically, Shad said, basically, he was like, what companies should be doing is they should be coming in with their best offer right up front, because that's the honorable, honest thing to do. You come in and you say, this is what this job pays. This is what it's worth. This is what you're worth to us. Is that acceptable to you? And then you say yes or no. You either say, okay, I'll take it, or you say, no, I need more money. And there should be no negotiating. It should be, well, sorry, that's our best offer. And the whole idea that you're coming in and you think that somebody's worth $60,000 a year or something like that, and you say, well, let's offer them 50 and see if they'll take it, is a slimeball thing to do. But it's the way business works, and it's the way contracts work. And so in that regard, I thought it was a really interesting an interesting point that Shad made that resonated with me, where I don't think that the Daily Wire in any regards is like slimeball people that are trying to be deceitful. They're just doing the way business is done. They just approach it because that's the way you do it, right? You give your low offer, and then they come back with a higher offer, and you negotiate it back and forth until you come to a resolution. That's just the way business is done. But I agreed with the idea that that's not the way business should be done. And just because business should be done that way, that doesn't make it moral. And
you and I have undoubtedly had job interviews where they ask you how much you make and then how much you're looking for.
Oh, every job interview.
And yeah, I've only had one job interview where from the very beginning they said this job pays X amount of dollars. Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
And it happens to be what I'm making right now. It wasn't this job, but it happens to be what I'm making now. And I said, yeah, I'm fine with it. And it was really nice to have that, because then it became my decision whether or not I was going to pursue it. If I had made more money than that previously, or I felt like I was worth more money than that, I would have said, you know what, I don't think so. I think I should be paid this amount. And if they said, well, we just can't do that, this is what the job pays, and then nobody's wasting any time, because that was the very first conversation I had with anybody on the phone.
I think there's a place where some negotiation can obviously take place, but it should be based off of a starting point of the company putting their best foot forward. The way negotiation might take place is when if they put their best foot forward and they say, okay, we are offering you 60,000 for this, and that actually is legitimately their best offer, and you come back and you say, I need 70,000, I'm worth 70,000, then it becomes your job to explain and to prove to them why, and to say, I think you're misjudging how much I'm worth, and here's why. And then try to convince them. And even then, they may be able to say, well, sorry, we can't. This is the best that we can do. Or they may make the decision at that point to say, you know what, you're right, you are worth that. And so we're going to squeeze a little bit more out or something. Those sorts of things could take place and stuff. But just this whole practice of, we think that we could pay 70,000 for this job, but we're going to offer him 60 in the first place and see if he takes it. That's the practice that I think is, and it would be the same in reverse. If someone came in and said, I want to get 80,000 out of this job, so I'm going to go in and tell them that I want 90,000. And then when they offer me 70, then I'll negotiate it to 80 or whatever. Like, just that whole approach to things ought to be done away with realistically. You ought to go in with honesty right up front.
It would be nice if business worked out that way. I understand for the purpose of business, of course, is when you have the backroom conversation with your managers or your HR and whatnot, and you say, okay, what is the range of pay that or what is the maximum that we are willing to pay someone for this position? And you say $65,000 a year. And so the business is going to say, for the good of the business, we'll offer 65. And if they come back, we still got some wiggle room and try to get that. But at the same time, I do agree, though, that having that honesty up front and saying, this is what this job pays.
Well, particularly when you're in the position of power, when you're in the situation where you're the business and they're the employee, most employees that come into looking to get a job, they're not power players. They're not negotiating, masters. They're not lawyers or attorneys or anything like that. The company has all that sort of stuff behind them, and they have experience in this sort of stuff. And they also are the ones dangling the job that the person is desperately looking to fill.
Well, and that also is more prevalent among salaried employees than it is with hourly employees. Hourly employees almost always are told exactly what it's going to pay.
That is an excellent point. Which is the way it should be.
But a salary
gets negotiated. And maybe that's because they assume salaried people will be better at negotiating and should have more experience and be able to do that sort of thing. But it's just not true. It's not the reality. The reality is every time that I go into a job and they make me an offer that I feel is low and I want to negotiate it, it scares the stink out of me. It's very hard. I'm not a business type guy. I'm a creative type guy. I'm not a hard-nosed negotiator. That's not my personality type. It's not something I don't change jobs. I mean, I've changed more often than I like to, but it's not like I'm constantly out there, on the hustle, and that's what I'm good at and good at doing and stuff. So it puts this incredible pressure on me to feel like I need to cave under or I'm going to lose the job, because I feel like if they say, we'll pay you this much, and I go in and I say, no, I want this much, that they're going to say, okay, bye. And then I don't get the job, and I desperately need the job, sort of situation. So it's a terrible position to be in.
There was one negotiation over salary that I had that was very good, and that was they came back. They said, okay, this is how much we are willing to pay, and I said something to the effect of, hey, I'd like to go for this, and they went and it was $5,000 more a year. And then they said, then I talked about insurance. And I said, I'm looking at your insurance program, and I'm looking at how much money I am going to have to fork out just to insure my son, which ended up being $600 a month. That's how much it cost to insure my son.
That was then. It's
because
probably
the company
more
covered
now.
100%. The company covered 100% of my expenses. So I was covering just one additional person, and I was having to pay 100% of that. And so it was $600 a month. And I told them, look, this is really going to hurt me. I said, I have my expenses, and I can't. I think what any person should ever consider when they are doing a salary negotiation is you look at what you have to pay every single month, and then you add on top of that. You never say, I need this amount of money to live. When you sell yourself short and you only make what you are going to spend in all of your bills, and I'm not talking about having fun and eating out. I'm talking about your bills, your housing, your utilities, your food, your gasoline, your insurance, all of that. When you throw all of that in there, your childcare, schooling, whatever, and you sell yourself short to where you're only making that or maybe a couple $100 more a month, you have now lost the negotiation, because you should be able to go back to them and say, if I this is barely a living wage for me, and I cannot do that.
Well, it depends on what you're
and
worth.
If they are unwilling,
for your value, as far as your value and your skill, obviously.
But again, though, if you sell yourself short, you're telling them what you're worth,
and that makes a big difference.
So,
but on the other hand, you can't go in with like a couple of years experience and ask for a senior level salary. So
no, of course not. No,
there has to be a balance there,
by
obviously.
and large, yeah, absolutely. But I'm talking about a seasoned
Sure.
person, and really, if even a person just coming out of college, if that person says, I'm willing to work for the bare minimum, after going through all of this schooling and I've piled up all of this debt, I do believe that they are selling themselves short. So you should be able to ask for a few $100s more than what you actually are going to spend every single month in all of your expenses, because everybody needs to have some type of escape. And I think you've been here before. I've certainly been here many, many times. And that is, when you only have enough to live on, your life is not enjoyable. You cannot do the things that you want to do. And it doesn't mean that you have to live a lavish lifestyle. It just means that you are unable to do the things that you would normally do. So when it comes to negotiating, I do think that it would be awesome if both parties would be, morally
be honest and moral.
Morally
I was
good
trying to
in
think
those things,
how can we tie this back into morality? And there you go. You did it.
It really comes down to it, and ethics is morality, and negotiating in business is part of ethics.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not the same kind of moral decline that we've been talking about per se, but I did think it was interesting. And like I said,
no, this has been around for
news. The way that business works and the morality there is a
where we're talking about is morality. We're talking about
the decline in the relative morality movement.
Yes,
and stuff,
if you can stand in a room with your Savior, and do the things that you are doing and not feel guilty about them because you feel like you can do them in the same room with the Savior, then that I would consider to be moral.
Right.
If you cannot do those things because you do not believe that they would be accepted, it would be considered immoral.
It makes me feel incredibly guilty.
But see, that's how we should be. That's how we should really be guiding ourselves through our own lives.
The little dumb things that I do all the time that would not qualify.
The little dumb things that we say, in a joking way. The little things that we say, yeah, exactly. So anyway, but we're going to wrap this up. This has been an awesome discussion. I think that it really behooves us as a people individually to get ourselves in order. Morally, before we obviously ask for society to do so.
And certainly before we crusade for morality when we're not moral ourselves.
For exactly.
You see such hypocrisy. You see our just throw this out there really quickly. Our government going out there and preaching and claiming these principles of morality, and then you hear about all the corruption and orgies and terrible things and backroom deals and just corrupt immorality that exists.
That's what makes you not trust them. And it's the same thing with the entertainment industry. We now
horribly
see
immoral
that the
people
entertainment
preaching
industry
morality
is
at us, preaching morality at us.
They are. They really are the worst of the worst, because they're the ones that stand as the moral authority.
Yeah, with the absolutely least
they
morality.
Are the worst of the worst.
So
they're the scribes and Pharisees.
Yep.
They are the hypocrites. So
the den of vipers.
So anyway. Thanks for joining us, and like and subscribe. Comment below if you agree or disagree, because I'm sure that with a lot of what we've talked about can be controversial today, but we stand firm in our convictions on these things. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Later.